Hi, good day. It's me, Karl Kruszelnicki, Dr. Karl, from the University of Sydney and the ABC. And believe it or not, I wrote my very first story on climate change, but it wasn't called climate change. It was called greenhouse effect in 1981. Not for triple J, but just double J, or maybe even single J. It was probably before they invented radio. They probably just had somebody shouting really loudly from the backyard somewhere in Sydney. And in fact, back in 1973, if we're talking climate change, in 1973, Munich Re, the world's largest insurance company, saw that this thing called the greenhouse effect was causing extra events that they had to pay out money for. So they started charging people more. Nothing personal, it was just business. And that was in 1973. By the way, the insurance companies, before the doctors, found they could see that people who smoked cigarettes were dying sooner. So if you wanted a life insurance premium and you smoked cigarettes, they just charge you more. Nothing personal, it was just business. So hello, and I'm here to talk about climate change and COP26.
What is COP26?
COP26 is where a whole bunch of nations from around the world come together to discuss climate change based on the IPCC reports to work out what to do about it for the future of us and our children and nieces and nephews and their children and nieces and nephews and everybody into the future. And it's based on the following. Firstly, we've known that climate change was real since the mid-70s. Secondly, we have to do something about it. And thirdly, the Committee of Parties is all of the countries in the world coming together to say, look, this is real. And we've had great success before. So back in 1985, the scientists went to the world governments and say, hey, there's a thing in the atmosphere called the ozone layer. Who knew? And it protects us from ultraviolet light and also protects us from other things, protects plants in the ocean, etc., who make most of the oxygen. And by the way, it's being destroyed by a chemical called a CFC. Do something about it. And within 2 years, the governments of the world had got together and banned CFCs. However, that was not quite the case with the greenhouse effect. They were a bit, the fossil fuel companies were a bit sneakier.
And why is this one this COP? Why is COP26 particularly important?
All of the Committee of Party conferences have been very important. This one is just as important as all the other ones and the ones that will be. But we're getting closer to irreversible changes. Now, they're not irreversible so far. Let me make that perfectly clear. Sure, on the 4th of January, in 2020, Sydney was the hottest place on Earth. And sure, in that year, 20% of all the forests in Australia burnt down, even rainforests, which had never, ever burnt ever in their history of tens of thousands of years. And we also tipped the Earth off its axis. We proved that back in 2013, and we backed up again. And it does seem as though we've also made the days a bit faster as well, but it's still reversible. What's irreversible is if something like a huge glacier, say the Thwaites Glacier, Thwaites Glacier, look it up in Wikipedia and scare the heck out of yourself. If the Thwaites Glacier pops loose, now, it's moderately big, the size of the United Kingdom, half the size of Victoria or whatever. And sure, if it popped loose, it would raise the ocean levels a bit, but behind it are thousands and thousands and millions of square kilometres of ice, thick. And that is just kept in there by the plug. And if the plug comes loose, it'll go into the ocean. And we could be looking at half a metre in 20 years or something. Now, that's not irreversible either, but it's irreversible within the lifespan of anybody today. And so we want to stop that sort of stuff happening. That's why this one is important.
And what does that mean for Australia if we end up with irreversible symptoms of climate change?
All the nations of the world are suffering. And so recently a United Nations report looked at the world and found that we were having trouble with water security in the future. And looking at my notes here, it said here, let me just find it, it was CSIRO, I think it was. Yes, the report said that in Australia, that we have had, since the year 2000, last 21 years, we've got the Murray-Darling system, right? And water comes in, water goes out. Since the year 2000, the amount of water going in has dropped by 50%. Straight climate change. That was a CSI report, and a report from the Australian Bureau, just looking at my notes, of the Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences in July this year said that the average Australian farm is losing $30,000 a year because of problems with water due to climate change. So we'll be seeing many more effects, some good. These are the bad ones, but there will be some parts of the world that will benefit from climate change. It will get more rain if they want it, or less rain if they want that. But overall, any change is generally bad because you build your infrastructure to suit the local climate. And so we're stuck with the terrible truth that at the moment, the climate bands are moving away from the equator to the north and the south at around 5 kilometres per year, 50 kilometres per decade, 500 kilometres per century. And so we're ending up with changed conditions. And so the wheat fields might be here, but over the last century, the rain has shifted 500 kilometres.
Now, a lot of people say that Australia is a minor player when it comes to climate change. We're just a small fish. Why is it important that Australia attends COP26?
Australia is a small player. Okay, firstly, does that mean that when you go to the swimming pool, there's a little sign that says, it's okay to urinate in this corner because it doesn't go anywhere else? Second thing, if Australia is such a small player, why do we bother going into the First World War to help the Allied countries, the Second World War, etc., if we're such a small player, which we are, and we did? Thirdly, we're not a small player. If you add up our internal stuff, which is per head about 4 times the world average, and then our external stuff, we turn out to be probably the 5th biggest generator of greenhouse gas emissions in the known universe. So you're looking at about 35 to 40 billion tonnes a year. Okay, now just look at my little graphic, so I want to get this dead right. So China at the moment is number 1, over 10 billion tonnes a year. It used to be number 5, but it's actually taken over from America, the United States, and Europe. They were the number 1 for decades. So China's number 1 at about 10. United States about 5 billion tonnes a year. The European Union roughly about 3. India about 2 and a bit. And Australia is just under 2 billion tonnes a year. We are the 5th biggest emitter when you include our exports. And you have to include our exports. And you're thinking, surely Australia can do better than that. And we can, because if instead of going to billions of tonnes for the nation, you go to how many tonnes per person, we are up there around number 1 with about 80 tonnes of carbon dioxide per person, as compared to China, which is only 8, and we're up around 80. So we are number 1 per head of population in polluting the world. And you say, but we didn't burn it, we just exported the coal. Right, so I just go and get a whole lot of methamphetamine and then leave it outside the local primary school, and it's not my fault if the kids take it. Come on, give me a break.